Um, this video, uh, rather this PowerPoint with my voiceover, will try to trace some very important aspects of Middle English literature. And as I mentioned before, this is not a, all inclusive, and I have just tried to make David Dashes as my primary text, and I'm trying to just um, give you a simple exposure to this timeline and the literature related to this period. And I would expect you later on, when you are doing your masters, pursuing your masters, please read the text and other related texts for a deeper understanding. Technically, the Middle English period started with the Norman conquest in 1066. So, Norman conquest, which took place in Britain, specifically in England, was an 11th century invasion where England was occupied by an army of Norman, Breton, Flemish, and men from other provinces of the Kingdom of France. This particular alliance was led by the Duke of Normandy, you see, and therefore it is called the Norman Conquest. And the Duke was later named as William the Conqueror. And how the William came was because you know the Anglo-Saxon King Edward, he was childless, and probably, there is a saying that probably he gave some hope to William. And you see, there was always this marriage alliance between the two countries, that is England and France, and this made the relationship, very delicate. And the kings always considered themselves, rightful owners to each other country. To each other. The French kings considered themselves to be rightful owner of English, and vice versa. And this basically later caused the Hundred Years' War, which right now is not our subject of interest. And what is therefore understandable is the fact that it is because of this Norman conquest that French became an important language. But you see, it was not that French swept over the country overnight, and it was not that French ousted English, because English did have a very important mark, because the business class, the middle class, and the lower middle class, they still continued using English in their daily life. So there was a courtly literature that was patronized by the French ruling class when William the Conqueror took over, but the literature, the low literature, which was not the courtly literature, the alternative literature, that was still being continued in English, and that was rough, that was popular, that was didactic, that was used for religious purpose, and it did narrated the biblical stories, and therefore used by the clergy. So and maybe this literature underwent certain changes when the Norman conquest happened, and French the French influence became a very important kind of assimilation to English language. So we often see, if you remember, that Anglo-Saxon poetry was alliterative, and French poems were rhymed. So there was a move towards the rhymed couplets, and the alliterative lines started breaking into two, and it started becoming metrically more regular. Now, if you see this map on the right hand side of the slide, this map is the similar one which I had given for your Old English PowerPoint, and what was different in the Middle English, I want to point you out, but to point that out, I need the old map. So what is surprising, if you remember the Old English period, the West Saxon dialect, that is the Wessex, the dialect of Wessex, that was something that emerged out to be very important, you see. But in this period, what happened was, because of the French influence, because of the Norman conquest, um, there was this movement not only in the dialect but also in the subject matter. So earlier, if the poetry was very heroic in tone, because if you remember Beowulf, if you remember your other Anglo-Saxon Old English poems, they were very heroic in nature. They included conquests, adventure. So heroic poems are called chansons de geste, which I've mentioned over here. It's called chansons de geste. And here the subject changes to tales of Charlemagne. And somehow, there is a shift from pure heroic adventure to, romances. So you have King Arthur, who is a mythological king, and you have his ideals of love and sentiment that is reflected in Middle English literature. So the meaning of chansons de geste, as I mentioned just now, is actually, it means song of heroic deeds, and the word geste is derived from gesta, which is deeds or actions accomplished. And these are medieval narratives. They are type of epic poems that appear at the beginning of the start of Middle English literature. And when the chansons de geste starts appearing, the old heroic tone, as I just mentioned, with poems like Beowulf, or with poems, other heroic poems, the Wanderer, the Seafarer, etc., etc., we will find a certain difference in Middle English tone, whereby romantic element seeps in the pure adventurous note. So if in the Old English period you didn't have romance, you just had pure adventure, in the Middle English period you had romance along with adventure. Why? Because Middle English literature was heavily influenced by French literature, and French literature dealt with a lot of romances. That is the reason why romances started coming in the Middle English literature as well. Now we come to the language part. So how English changed. So if you remember, if you go through Dacious, even if you may not read each and every line, but if you just skim through it in the Old English period, you will find how Old English was, the how the alphabets were written. You will not be able to make out a lot of lines and meanings because it's so different from modern English. But you will see that how the language was written. The Old English primarily used the West Saxon dialect. Why? Because the West Saxon emerged as the most powerful kingdom at that time. But with the emergence of French influence, with the Norman conquest, with King Normandy taking over England, you see this entire map obviously underwent a change. So West Saxon or Wessex no longer remained the standard form of English. So what emerged out as the standard form? So if you go back to this map again, you will see, if you go back to the earlier map, you will see that there is this place called Mercia, and which was near London. So it was originally a southern dialect with its characteristics largely southeastern, but by Chaucer's time it had become mainly East Midland in character, with the result that standard modern English derives from East Midland. So if you go back to the PowerPoint, the previous map, you will see that the Mercian, part became, the dialect that the Mercian kingdom spoke, not the Wessex, but the Mercian kingdom, which was basically East Midland in character, because Mercia got split into East Midland and West Midland. So it was basically East Midland, that the dialect that was spoken in East Midland, that became the standard English. And gradually, the London dialect picked up a lot of its sources from East Midland, and later on, after centuries, the London dialect became the standard form, simply because London became the center of economic, cultural and political importance. So whichever place becomes a center of cultural, political importance, that place, obviously the dialect that is spoken in that place becomes the standard form of the language spoken. Now we come to the next part, that how Norman conquest was a little different from Saxon or Danish invasion. So we see that how it was different is because Norman conquest catered only to the particular class, that was the aristocratic class, which heavily used French in their in the court and in the political affairs of the country. But in case of it was never a mass conquest, and the majority of people, they continued using English in their daily life, which was unlike Saxon or Danish invasion, because when these invasions took place, there was a complete reform in every class of the country. So, of course, there were many ecclesiastical reforms that was introduced into England by the Normans, and one of them was the usage of Latin besides French. So you see, three languages came to be used. So Latin was used for official documents, and of course it was replaced by Anglo-French in the 13th century, but till that time, Latin continued to be used in official documents, and French was used by the aristocratic, the nobility, the king, and English was continued to be used by the masses, the peasant class, the business class, etc. Um, it's therefore, because I pointed out in the earlier slide that Norman conquest was very different from the Saxon or the Danish invasions. So you see, literature continued to have the native influence, that is the English influence, and you see, the first instances of literature that we get in the Middle English period was Historia Regum Britanniae, which was written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and basically it was written in Latin and it was later translated. So because as I just pointed out, that Latin was encouraged as an official language. So of course, Normans, as I said, introduced Latin as an official language. So this literature was also written in that language, and this particular book tells of the story of, as I said, King Arthur, who becomes a very important hero in this period in Middle English literature. Now, who was King Arthur? As I said, he was a mythological hero, a legendary British leader, and according to medieval histories and romances, he was the one who tried to protect Britain against Saxon invaders. So when already the Saxon invasion has taken place, so what is very surprising is, in the Middle English you have a literature like this, which talks about a king who is trying to defend Britain against Saxon invaders. So it is the duty of one kingdom to vilify or make another kingdoms, trivial. So when the Normans come, they want to prove that Saxons are, are someone to kind of, Saxons are a race that is to be avoided, and Normans are a race that is to be glorified. So you have a literature like this which talks about a leader who basically defends Britain against the Saxon invaders. And you will find the details of Arthur's story in the form of folklore, in the form of in many of the modern historians, when they have reinterpreted King Arthur's story, and they have kind of established the fact that he is basically not a true historical character. Apart from this, we also have a lot of Anglo-French chroniclers that was produced, and we have Wace's Roman de Brute, that was a translation of this particular book. And for the first time, he mentions not only King Arthur, but also he had a team of knights, who sat around the round table. So you have King Arthur and his round table, which is a very famous mythological motive, which is conspicuous in Middle English literature. And finally, when Wace's Roman de Brute gets translated by Layamon, the English are able to finally read Arthurian story. Before that, King Arthur's stories were not accessible to the people who specifically spoke English language. Um, Now we come to the next kind of literature, which was very popular in the Middle English period. They are called Breton LAIS. So they were basically Celtic in nature. Celtic, is the original language of the inhabitants who were staying in England before the Anglo-Saxon invasions. So Celtic is the original language, after which Anglo-Saxons come in. So Breton lawyers are basically very Celtic in character, but the French, when they came to England because of the invasion, they took up lies and they modified them, and they included a number of romances, they included entertainment value inside, and appropriated, the lies, and gave it a lot of French element. So that is something that we need to remember. And it derived, not only it derived from Welsh and Breton sources, as I mentioned. And of course, after the French came, they tried to make some changes in the lie. At the same time, we have to talk about prose, because prose is something where the native Anglo-Saxon tradition was very much maintained, even if the French influence had by that time became rampant in the country. So we have the Worcester fragments, and they are fragments because we only have remnants of the manuscript. We don't have the entire manuscript. And if you remember Elfric's grammar, which was Old English, addition to this, we have the Worcester fragments, which was recovered in the Middle English period. And we have this Ormulum, which was written by Orm, and Orm's intention was to translate into English verse the Gospels that were read in the Mass. So that was how the native Anglo-Saxon tradition was preserved in the form of Middle English prose a little. And what I like about this prose is it underwent a certain change, because it had a feminine ending, and there were 15 syllables in one line. And if we divide the line, we would get the ballad, the genre, which is ballad, which is a kind of poetry that was written late into literature in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, 20th century. So the ballad that we came to read in the latter centuries that originated, that kind of got influenced by this period, which started ballad writing. And what you need to also remember is because why was Anglo-Saxon able to preserve its tradition despite the French influence? Was because Latin, you see, was the language of the elite and the educated, and the Danish invasions that had taken place, that did not favor Latin, of course. So it helped Anglo-Saxon prose to survive even in Middle English literature. Now, why we need to remember, we need to understand that rhyming is something that we notice for the first time, because before this, the English literature did not know rhyming. We had alliterative verse stanzas, but they did not rhyme. So, for the first time, we have Cursa Mundi, which is an enormous poem of some 30,000 lines, and it was written in octosyllabic couplet, which the English learned from French. And we have the Owl and the Nightingale, which is the first example of debate. You know, when I'm talking about debate, it means debate in your modern English. And it is a conversation between two or more speakers where they are arguing about a particular concept. So debate, which is so modern and which takes place in intellectual circles, takes its origin from, you know, Middle English period, where where we start this form of discourse so early. And at that time, you know, the debate was written because it wanted to give out a message to the people. So what kind of message was it trying to give out? So it basically stood out for the two ways of lives. So Middle English period, let me tell you, had or rather focused on two important binaries, the religious and the secular. So either you are you are leading a monastic life, wherein you have left all the comfort of your secular life and you are moving towards your enlightenment, or you are leading a secular life. So the two kinds of poetry that Middle English talks about is the didactic and the amorous. So the didactic is the moral part, and the amorous is, of course, that gives pleasure, because it comes from amour, which means love. The French word for amour, the French word amour means love. But we also have a revival of the alliterative tradition. So, though alliterative tradition is something that is particular to the Old English period, but we also have the revival in the 14th century of the alliterative poems, because as I said, French, Latin was restricted to the aristocratic and the nobility. The masses kept on cultivating, kept on nurturing, kept on speaking and writing in English. So therefore, it is only natural that they would be nostalgic towards the Anglo-Saxon tradition of writing poems in the alliterative manner. So what are the important poems in this period? I mean, the alliterative revival period. We have Piers Plowman, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and these two poems are written in alliterative blank verse technique. So in blank verse, usually no rhyming pattern is followed. And apart from this, you have patience, purity, and pearl. Now, what I would request you to do is, I'm not requesting you to go through each and every line of this chapter, because I am basically giving you a PowerPoint which is a combination of the three chapters. But what I would request you to do is just to go through the storyline behind these poems, which are listed in this particular slide. That is Piers Plowman, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, patience, purity, and pearl. It's very important that you know about these poems, because they are extremely important poems during this period. as I said earlier, that we have a continuity in prose too, and prose was basically very religious because it was used to of course sensitize people to lead a very sincere religious life. So you have a group called the Catherine Group, which talks about the lives of three virgin saints, Catherine, Margaret, and Juliana. So it is a group. It is a group of poems. Sorry, prose, which talks about the advantages of virginity, which talks about the dis the disadvantages of marriage, and the kind of suffering that it causes, and therefore it is only desirable that women could think of nunnery as a method to relieve all sufferings in this world, and you know unite with the Almighty. So, this is something which is extremely patriarchal, and we will come to it later. I do not want to deconstruct Middle English, but I am forced to say certain lines which, of course, which talks about this kind of a thought process. And you see, Ancrine Rule is a manual which is written in prose at that time, and it's intended for three young girls who had decided to become anchoresses. So basically, it advocates the role of women in society, how women are supposed to behave, how they are encouraged to lead a monastic life if possible, because Middle English is largely, trying to tell us that women are seductresses, and therefore only those women who enter monastic life are worthy of worship. So this is something that, of course, this is something that the feminists would never argue, would never agree with. And of course, as a sensitive woman too, I would personally not agree with this. Now you see, there is an emphasis on devotional literature, as I said. And why is this point? I will tell you that why there is an emphasis on devotional literature, why there is an emphasis on women supposed to behave in a certain manner, this emphasis on leading a monastic life for many women, if possible, the kind of writings which are very religious, dealing with virgin saints. Why is this so conspicuous in Middle English literature? So before coming to that why, let me just take you through devotional literature a little. So you have Richard Rolle of Hampole, you have John Wycliffe, who basically indulged in devotional and mystical writings. Now, uh, what are some of the differences um, between say an old English heroic poetry and a Middle English chasse or digest? So you see, as I have mentioned here, fighting in heroic poetry is a grim affair, and even if the hero is liable to lose, he must fight against heavy odds. But this adventure is very natural. But what happens in the Middle English romances? In the Middle English romances, war becomes a sort of a romance itself. So you have to go, in Old English, people are forced to fight because they have no other option. There is an enemy coming attacking you, so you have no other option but to fight. It is not considered to be romantic to fight. But you see, in the Middle English period, it is as if, just to show off your bravery, how brave you are indulging in a fight. So later on, I feel that, just this kind of technique is used by the 18th century writers. If you remember Sheridan, The Rivals, or if you where, grueling was considered to be a sort of a fight, declaring a fight was considered to be very fashionable in amongst the upper class. So as if, going to fight is a sort of fashion where you are just showing off how strong you can be. You are showing off your skills at sword fighting, etc., etc. So it is not fighting for a natural cause, but uh, trying to declare, giving it a romantic appropriation. That is something which Chasseur de Geste talks about. And Chasseur de Roland is one of the poems which deals with this kind of a theme, which is Chasseur de Geste. And as I have mentioned earlier, Chasseur de Geste is definitely of the series of French epic poems, which deals with heroic adventures but with a romantic twist. Now, they basically were produced in northern France, and the romance element uh, was added by the southern part of France, because that was especially this place called Provence, because that was the area from where sentiment and courtly love came. Now, in the 10th century, you see, uh, as I spoke about Provence in the earlier slide, so the dialect which was spoken in Provence, which is the south, which is in South France, the name of the dialect was Languedoc, and it became very it became a standard form at that time in France. And the meter of this dialect was regular and syllabic, and rhyme was used. Now that is the reason why the French influence on Middle English literature produced rhymes and octosyllabic couplets. Now, therefore, this is a repetition of my previous slide when I said that the difference between narrative romance of action and that of a typical romance is that from the southern part the romance element was added to the otherwise pure tale of adventure. And you need to remember about trouvères, who were basically originated from northern France. And you also have, during the English Anglo-Saxon period, you have oral poets who narrated poetry. Similarly, trouvères, they were also nomads, so, I mean, who used to travel, kind of poets, wandering minstrels who used to travel from one kingdom to another, narrating the literature. And they used to narrate the literature in particularly this dialect, that is the Languedoil, which was the northern dialect, and Languedoc, which was the southern dialect. And therefore we have the influence of both these dialects into the Middle English literature. And Languedoc was the language of romance, and Languedoil was like Anglo-Saxon, which spoke about pure heroic adventure. The most important section of Middle English literature is the classification of Middle English literature into three matters. So one of the oral poets, one of the 12th century trouvère named Jean Bodle, uh, divided the Middle English literature into three categories: matter of France, matter of Britain, and matter of Rome. So what is matter of France? So the matter of France deals with poems which talks about Charlemagne, the French king, and his knights. And as I spoke about Chasseur de Geste, and I spoke about Chasseur de Roland, which was one of the poems of the Chasseur de Geste theme. So it talks about the king Charlemagne, his courageous fights against villains, and his series of adventures ending with the hero's death. And later on, these poems become more and more moral as we proceed towards the modern centuries. The matter of Britain is concerned with King Arthur's stories, which we have already done. I have already told you about the Arthurian stories, and how we get to know about these Arthurian stories by the translation of the book Historia by Geoffrey of Monmouth by Lyamon, who basically translated it via Brute. Now, what was Matter of Rome? So, Matter of Rome was how basically Rome and Greece was seen through, the medieval English eyes. So, when I talk about Rome and Greece, it's not the world of Homer that I'm talking about or that of Virgil, but it was much before that. It was the story of Troy, as mentioned by Dictys and Darius. So it was the mention of how Troy was seized, and it talks about Alexander, it talks about Julius Caesar, it talks about Thebes, but ultimately it is not definitely about Homer and Virgil. So, if we come to after the matters, let me remind you of the theme that Middle English was specifically characterized by. So, this is now the reason why I told you why there were so many manual instruction about how pure a life a woman should lead, why there were so many book on virgin saints, why was there literature divided into two binaries that I was talking about, that is the secular and the religious, the monastic and the amorous. The Why? Because of the courtly love tradition. So what is the courtly love tradition? So you see, Middle English society was very feudal in nature. So in feudalism, what happens? There is a manor, say a prince or a lord, and of a particular estate. The lord lives with his wife. There are servants in the castle. There are noblemen, and below the say the lord, there are certain other knights, and so there is a small population of which the lord is the master. Now you see, the lord had to often go for a lot of wars, battles. I mean, he had to be away most of the time. So when he was away, there were other men, the other knights, the noblemen, who could have been attracted to his wife. So, what was the kind of love that became functional in society to avoid uh, such scandalous relation between the knights and the wife of the lord? So, a courtly love came into being. Now, what was this courtly love? That is, the knights would look at the lady, that is the wife of the lord, of course, as an object of love and desire, but the knights would worship the lady. So you can fall in love, you can this is within brackets, you may fantasize, but there the relationship would be purely platonic. So it would be a one-sided pining for love. The lady may not reciprocate your love, of course, and the lady was often compared to Virgin Mary. And if the lady even looked at one of the knights, just glance, that would be considered to be enough for the knight to live his entire life. That would be considered as the greatest reward, and he would be ready to undergo any hardship for that sake. And I personally believe that this was basically a sort of adultery, but a sanctioned adultery in platonic terms, because there was no physical relationship, therefore it was allowed. So you see how hypocrite it can be. And But one thing that I would like to point out here is that this kind of a love was never ever associated with marriage. It was considered to be a sort of platonic worship. It was only later that love became associated with marriage, as I mentioned at the end. So it only later, appropriates marriage, because marriage was very, very um, political, economical, and cultural in mode. It was never related to emotion. So people married because of joining kingdoms, because of other political reasons, because of property, expansion of kingdoms. So marriage was never seen as a medium of partnership or emotional needs. But love, courtly love, of course, was always seen as a very ideal form of romance. It was seen as true love. So the knight and the wife of the Lord could be in real, ideal love that we all dream of. But let me remind you once more, love and marriage were two separate connotations. So marriage was always political, cultural, economical, and love was always just for love. So this is something that I found very problematic, of course, but at the same time, it is also very liberating. And that is the reason, you see, the ideal woman changed from Eve to Virgin Mary. So Eve is seen as a seductress, and Virgin Mary became the new woman, and she was the ideal of every woman to achieve, because the man was always away at the crusades fighting. So it is very important to tell the women that only good women, Virgin Mary, be like Virgin Mary, then you will be a good woman. So this was the theory that was used throughout this period to protect women from to kind of tell women that, look, you cannot seek pleasure, then you will not be a good woman. Good women like Virgin Mary are never seek pleasure, they remain virgin. So you see, they remain devoted only to the man they are married too. And even if the man is away for years, the woman is supposed to wait quietly and not have any desire or pleasure. Because if the woman has any desire, the woman would not remain a good woman or an ideal woman or a Virgin Mary anymore. So that was how women were schooled, because patriarchy knew that was only way of repressing women when men were away at the crusades fighting. Um, if we come to some of the adaptations, uh, we see that when some of the French literature was getting translated, of course, the sentiment in French literature, because I'm sorry for the typo error here, um, the sentiment in the French literature, because it dealt with romances, uh, it got substituted, I mean, got supplanted, got mixed with the pure adventure strain, the pure heroic strain that was so much a particular property of the English, the native English tradition. So whenever the English translated from French, they left out sentiments and they stuck to adventure. We have an example of a matter of Britain's story, Owain and Gawain, where we have the story of adventures of a knight who marries the widow of a conquered foe, is separated, and after many valorous deeds become reunited. What I'm trying to tell you is how the stories come as adaptations, where the romance element is not important, but the adventure element becomes important whenever there is a translation or an adaptation from French literature into English literature. We also have Mort Arthur, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which I've already told you. So these are, these fall under matter of written literature, which I've discussed, the three matters that I was talking about. And in these poems, what I find, why I said that Sir Gawain and Green Knight is the most important poem of Middle English period, because Sir Gawain and the Green Knight has qualities of the Anglo-Saxon, of the French, and of the Celtic tradition. So before the Anglo-Saxons, we had the Celts. After the Anglo-Saxons came in, we had the Anglo-Saxons. After that, we had the French influence. But this particular poem, it has influences from all the three traditions that have characterized the British kingdom so far. Therefore, this particular poem you are supposed to know. And let me tell you, this story is given on page 61 of the David Dasher's PDF that I have sent. So please go through the discussion of the poem. And when we were pursuing masters, we did have portions of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the text. We also had Beowulf, the original text. Apart from the three matters that we have just learned, that is matter of Britain, matter of Rome, matter of France, we have matter of England, which is the fourth group. And what does the matter of England deal with? It deals with the Viking raids on England, and King Horn, which is one of it combines the romantic elements with the adventure elements. And King Horn is a very important poem that was a characteristic of the matter of England. But matter of England are mainly adaptations, where the English, when they were translating or adapting from the French, as I pointed out earlier, they left out the sentimental, the romantic, and the courtly elements of the French culture, and they emphasized on action and adventure, which was always very native English in tradition. We also have a mention of Havelock the Dane, we have Floris and Blanchefleur, we have Sir Orfeo. These are names that you're supposed to know, because if you don't know names of the poems in each of the literary periods, then it's going to be very difficult for you to proceed. So that is why I dropped names for you. You are supposed to know what it deals with when you're reading the text by and by. Uh, you know, of course, there have been experiments in the literature, and we have English romances. It's not that always everything was action oriented. We did have romantic elements, we did have rhyming couplets. As I said, that Sir Gawain and Green Knight is a very good blend of both the heroic and the romantic strains. And Middle English was slowly trying to pick up the sophistication of the French literature, and it was trying to become more and more romantic at times, but of course not. Most of the time it retained the heroic strain, but it was trying. And only with Chaucer. Now Chaucer is a poet which I cannot cover in this PowerPoint, so it will be the next PowerPoint. And with Chaucer, Middle English literature arrived at the climax of its development. We have a couple of other kinds of literature before we finally end our presentation. So we have Fabliau, which is a kind of French romance, and it talks about the feudal system that was prevalent, and I explained the feudal system to you. And later on, it is also associated with the new middle class, when the feudal system was actually decaying, and the new class, which is the business class who carried on commercial activity, and they also started reading or liking Fabliau, because they were basically short pieces that combines Christian virtues as well. And when it was translated into English, it had lost most of its romantic elements. So the business class was attracted to this particular kind of literature, and they started patronizing it. We have Fabliaux, uh, which again was found in France, was rare in England, but it originated in northern France, and it had a rustic appeal to it. And as I said, that it was also known by with the spelling X, but the difference, I would say, with the Fabliau is the fact that Fabliau with an X, they originally dealt with animal allegories. So you had characters in the story, in the poem, sorry, in the story, which were animals, and through the animals, we get to know about how human beings are. So that is something which later on Chaucer, and during his time it became more and more popular. But they are basically, animals are given, central characters to bring out the bestial nature in men. So human beings get to know that how they should behave and how they actually behave through these animal stories. So we have Fabliau with an X, which is very moral in its tone, and they were basically later taken up by Chaucer in his Canterbury Tales. When I say CT, I mean Canterbury Tales. And if you do not know Canterbury Tales, your knowledge of Middle English literature will not be complete. So we will talk about Canterbury Tales in the next PowerPoint when I talk about Chaucer. Um, Now we come to this word fable. Fable is a kind of story where these stories were fully developed. And here we have Reynard the Fox, who was a principal hero or villain, and through his adventures, we get to learn about how human beings actually behave. So it's a form of allegory. Through the fox, through the behavior of the fox and the adventures of the fox, we get to know about how human beings are. So there was always a moral at the end of each and every story. And we have carol literature, which is basically like a song with a refrain. And uh, and and, and we have, there was this lead singer singing and the whole group joining in the refrain. And this carol was the harbinger of lyrical poems which the romantic poets perfected. Now, as I said, that the other, which I call in medieval literature, is of course the chanson d'adventure, where we have this series of poems which talks of songs of lovers parting at dawn. The chanson de Malmarie gives a woman's complaint against married life. We have chanson de carol, which is a dance song with refrain. And these poems were not very were not mentioned in mainstream literature, because they basically were literature of the lower classes, but they are very popular. And sometimes, these poems cannot be distinguished from the court poetry. Of course, if you have a very acute and a sensitive eye, you can distinguish between the two. But often, we see there is an overlap between these other kinds of lowly poetry and the courtly poetry which the upper class dealt with. We have political lyrics, which is a song of Lewes, a mocking poem addressed by the followers of Simon de Montfort after the Battle of Lewes to Richard, Earl of Cornwall. So we have political um, writings where People are dug at, people are made mockery of, and therefore, I mean, we can call it a sort of journalism which started with these kind of poems. We have religious lyrics and allegories, and you know what I like is the fact that as I was talking about the animals that were used as symbols. So we have different kinds of allegory. Sometimes Christian commentary, religious commentary is done where Roman gods are personified, and it was a tendency to encourage Christianity. We have beast allegories, and by this time we have allegories where it is talking about what is good for you and what is bad for you, what is sin and what is salvation. So allegories overall are become a very important form of literature during the Middle English period. Now, when we come to allegory, the most important allegory that we can think of, uh, before that, before going on to allegorical romance, I must talk about three kinds of allegories that existed: the lyric, the narrative, and the allegorical romance. So, the narrative and the lyric romance we have already spoken about. The allegorical romance, Roman de la Rose is a most important poem of this kind of a group, the allegorical romance form of literature. Now, why is it called an allegory? Because what is peculiar about this poem is the first part was written in 1227, and the next part you see is written several years after, almost 40 years later. So you have 1266, 68 to 77. So and what why is it called an allegory? Because this is, first of all, this is a dream allegory, because the entire poem takes place in the form of a dream. The poet is dreaming. But again, why is it called allegory? Because through this poem, the poem talks not directly but indirectly about women, about qualities that women should have: shame, fear, kindliness, courtesy. Very, very patriarchal anyway. And all these qualities are not told to you directly. That is why this is an allegory. So there is this Rose, this man, this hero, who is encountering with the lady in her different moods, in which she encourages and in other which she repels his suit. And in this entire poem, this poet, this hero, is trying to obtain the rose. Now this rose is a symbol of the lady's love, and this rose is situated in the garden, which is the scene of the action. So this this poem is about a hero trying to obtain a rose, but it actually wants to talk about a man trying to woo a lady, and a good lady must have these qualities. So that is why this poem is called an allegory. So, as I said, that ballads were originated, ballads flourished in this particular period, and we have the Robin Hood ballads, and this ballad form later influenced romantic poets like Coleridge, of course not Wordsworth, and it definitely helped to perfect, to romanticize romantic poetry. So these were the forms of literature that I could kind of uh, tell you, talk about it. And what I would request you is, you must go through Dacius, particularly the poems that I mentioned, that is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Pearl, Purity, Patience, Roman de la Rose, and you must know the characteristics in general of the different genres that was taking place. That is the three matters: the matter of Rome, Britain, France; the fourth matter, the matter of England; and the kinds of literature apart from the matters: the fable, the fabliau, the ballads, the carols. and you should be ready to get into Middle English literature in its proper form, which later culminated with Chaucer. Thank you very much.